Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Journeys with Jay. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. I hope you enjoy it. If you're not, thanks so much for coming back. In this episode, join me as I explore a little bit of the downtown Toronto area, specifically the Roundhouse Park and Toronto Railway Museum. Let's go! So a trip to Toronto is not complete, especially given today's topic, without a ride on the TTC, Toronto Transit Commission. And I'm on the subway headed to Union Station. As you can see, this subway car is a little on the tired older side compared to some others in some more modern cities. So here, walking along King Street West and 73, Simcoe Street, by St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, which was built in 1874 using the Romanesque Revival style. This is the Union Building of Toronto, completed in 1903. There are more than 300 sculptures in Toronto, both contemporary and historical. It is actually one of my favorite things about Toronto. And seemingly, they have more than most Canadian cities. Dreaming, made of marble and resin by Jamie Placena, is an analogy of human dreams for the future and shared human experiences. This British phone booth stands outside the Elephant and Castle, a British-themed pub in Toronto. Just opposite the Rogers Centre, the CN Tower, and Ripley's Aquarium is Roundhouse Park, the home of the Toronto Railway Museum. This sign reads, "You are now standing in the middle of what was once the Toronto locomotive and car facilities of the Canadian Pacific Railway. These facilities were built in 1929 to service the 75 CPR passenger trains a day that utilized the new Union Station. Railroaders call this complex John Street after the thoroughfare that was extended south of the tracks over a bridge. In its prime, John Street included 43 structures, several miles of track, and 16 acres of property that stretched as far as Bay Street. The facilities were busiest during the 1940s and 50s until the CPR replaced steam locomotives with diesels, a process that was complete by 1960. John Street continued to service passenger cars and diesel locomotives until 1982. In 1988, the Roundhouse was closed and turned over to the City of Toronto for redevelopment as the Toronto Railway Heritage Centre. A series of interpretive plaques explaining the history of this unique National Historic Site will guide you through the Roundhouse Park and help you appreciate Toronto's fascinating railway history. The John Street Roundhouse was once part of a vast complex of railway facilities that extended 2 miles from Streatham Avenue to Yonge Street and became known as the railway lands. When the railways first entered Toronto in the 1850s, there wasn't enough available property for their installations, so they created new land by filling in the harbor south from the original shoreline near Front Street. This process continued until the 1920s when the harbor assumed its present configuration. Railway lands had become the most valuable real estate in Canada, and CN Spadina Roundhouse was demolished to make way for Skydome. Many of Toronto's best-known landmarks occupy property that was once used for railway purposes, including Roy Thompson Hall, the CBC Broadcast Centre, the CN Tower, and Air Canada Centre. This is the front end of a diesel bulldog locomotive. John Street was one of the largest passenger car maintenance facilities in the vast Canadian Pacific Railway system. The coach yards could hold 450 passenger cars, each over 80 feet in length. Coupled together, these would comprise a train more than 7 miles long. Roundhouses were unique circular buildings used to inspect, clean, and repair a steam locomotive at the end of an operating cycle and make it ready for the next trip. At one time, there were more than 3,000 roundhouses in North America. Today, fewer than 200 remain. The first Canadian Pacific roundhouse on this site was built at a lower elevation in 1897. By the 1920s, a completely updated facility was required to complement the new Union Station. The John Street Roundhouse was opened in October 1929. On the west side of the roundhouse is the machine shop annex used to house power-driven machinery for locomotive repairs. In its heyday, the John Street Roundhouse was a hive of activity, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until the end of the 1950s when the number of diesel locomotives overtook steam locomotives. Although a third of the structure has been dismantled, the John Street Roundhouse was designated a National Historic Site of Canada in 1990. It is the only remaining roundhouse in downtown Toronto. The other 6 were demolished between 1940 and 2001. For example, the CNR Spadina Roundhouse was demolished in 1986 to make way for the Rogers Centre. It could house and maintain 32 locomotives at a time with its 32 wooden doors facing the 120-foot turntable. This was the largest in the Canadian Pacific Railway fleet. So it goes all the way around to 32, and this is the roundhouse and the turntable, I think it's called, which would allow the different trains to enter and leave on the tracks. Roundhouses allowed the railways to centralize the skilled labor and machinery necessary to clean, fuel, and maintain locomotives. Steam locomotives were far more labor intensive than today's modern diesel engines, and hundreds of workers were employed at John Street and worked 24 hours a day during the steam era. Although the work could be uncomfortable, strenuous, dirty, and sometimes dangerous, skilled trade railway jobs were prestigious and well paid. Since this roundhouse had excellent external lighting and employed the direct steaming process, the greatly improved air quality and visibility in the roundhouse provided a much cleaner working environment than most roundhouses with their badly polluted air and poor visibility. 3 of the stalls of the roundhouse are used for the indoor exhibits of the museum. The grounds of Roundhouse Park host a miniature railway, railway engines, and a railway village, including a station, a signal house, watchman's shanty, water tower, and a coaling tower used to load coal. CN6213 is a large 484 locomotive built in 1942 in Montreal. It is number 14 of 35 in its class built and was in service until 1959. It was donated to the museum and brought here in 2009. This is the CNR GP7 diesel, number 4803, built in 1953. It represented the shift from steam locomotives to diesel. It is known as a GP or general purpose locomotive. Although diesel locomotives were more expensive to build, they were much easier to maintain and less expensive to operate than the steam locomotives. 112 of these were built for Canadian railroads. At the front and rear of the diesel locomotives were air hoses for air brakes, an invention that greatly improved the safety of trains. Over 7,000 locomotives similar to this were found throughout North America, and this unit operated over most of Canada. 4803 was retired in 1984. The TNB Railway Caboose number 70 was built in 1913. It was found on trains used to link Toronto with the steel mills of the USA. Cabooses were often found on the back of every freight train until the 1980s. This is where the train crew were based and slept on their long journeys. Inside would be beds, desks, sitting areas, kitchenettes, stoves, and a bathroom. This is a cupola with elevated seats inside of the caboose, where the engineers would look out. Hence the saying, the Little Red Caboose. The Canadian Pacific Solarium Lounge, known as the Cape Racer Car, is a luxury passenger car built in 1929. This lounge car ran from Montreal to Vancouver and is named Cape Racer after a famous Canadian river in British Columbia. It is called a solarium due to the high number of windows present, giving passengers lots of viewing areas and allowing a lot of natural light in, which was considered good for health. It served as a business car until 1969. Many of the sleeping car porters were actually black Canadians. Unfortunately, they were not treated well. These workers bonded together in 1949 and created the first trade union for and by black Canadians. This union pioneered the civil rights movement in Canada. Some of the tracks are still in use, as miniature train rides on selected dates from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. At the east end of Roundhouse Park, we have this two-story building labeled Cabin D with an adjoining tool shed. It is one of several lettered switching stations that was located along the tracks coming from Union Station. Cabin D is an interlocking tower built by the Grand Turk Railway in the 1890s. It was one of 5 towers lettered from A to E that controlled the signal lights and track switches around Union Station. Cabin D was built in 1894. Switching towers like this were elevated to give operators a clear view of the track and signals. The flared roof has elements of the Asia Pangola style design, as it was a popular design choice in North America in the 19th century. The Canadian Pacific Railway sleeper car was built in 1931, and it was often used by families, commercial traders, and troops during wartime. Here is some interesting information for you. Prior to the 1850s, part of this railway land was actually the waterfront. From the 1850s to 1920s, the area south of Front Street was filled in to provide more room for railways, industrial growth, and harbor needs. So a couple centuries ago, this was actually partly underwater. The Canadian Pacific Railway Dawn Station. The original train station was built in 1896 and closed in 1967. It moved to this site in 2008. In the 1920s, over 20 passenger trains stopped at Dawn every day, including the CPR's most important trains for Ottawa and Montreal. Following the opening of the new Union Station in 1927, Dawn declined in importance, although it remained a train order station for crews of both the CPR and CNR passenger and freight trains. Steam locomotives serviced at John Street required vast quantities of water, which was pumped in from Lake Ontario and stored in this 60,000-gallon tower. The height of the tower provided sufficient gravity so that the water could flow through the underground piping into standpipes. The fire generated by burning coal in the boiler of the locomotive would heat the water to the boiling point, generating the steam energy required to propel the train, heat the passenger cars, pump enough air to operate all the brakes of the train, and blow the distinctive whistle that characterized the railway age of steam. In an era long before the concept of conserving natural resources was familiar to most people, Canadian Pacific recycled the hot water that was used to wash out the locomotive boilers by conserving it in a large tank in the machine shop and then circulating it back into the locomotives without it having to be completely reheated. If you liked learning a little bit of Toronto's railway history, please make sure to leave a comment in the comment section and give the video a thumbs up. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Until next time, keep safe, God bless. It's your boy Saint J, out of here.